So again, everyone, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to today's webinar. Today's topic is going to be best practices on CAD drawing management. So why this topic? CAD CAFM standards and documentation are sometimes underutilized, in my opinion, mostly underutilized or non-existent. So having well-established standards in drawings will aid in a more efficient implementation or transition to a new CAFM IWMS system. But more than that, it's also critical for change management when working with architects and design and construction, and helps define your business processes in the very end. So to go through introductions, I mentioned earlier, I'm Henry Massey, Senior Director of Workplace Technology. I'm a corporate real estate and workplace technology leader with a successful track record consulting and implementing in all major verticals. I specialize in providing world-class solutions and strategic direction to the Global 2000s to resolve their business needs and pain points through technology. Mike?
Mike Nelson, Senior CAD CAFM Manager. I have 20 plus years of CAD CAFM experience in the real estate industry. I've worked on the client side and vendor side, from Fortune 500s to small accounts. My specialties would include AutoCAD, knowledge of the major CAFM platforms, implementation projects, and CAD standards.
Awesome. Good to have you, Mike.
Thanks.
So looking at today's agenda, what is our topics? So with that, you have well-established standards and documentation related to CAD CAFM, why you should have CAD CAFM standards, review of the CAD CAFM playbook and related documentation. We'll look at using tools to implement the standards, and at the very end, we'll close off with Q&A. We should be kicking off a poll at this moment. Asking a very big question. Is there current CAD standards playbook in use at your organization? I'll let a few seconds go by as those poll results come in. So a lot of it pushing towards the no at the moment. Very little are saying yes. Okay. Awesome. And if you are, if you do have CAD playbooks, I'm very curious as to, are they just outdated? Do they just need to be relooked at? Maybe new business processes are in place. I'd love to hear from you in the chat room on what is it that you're looking for currently today. All right, so Mike, jumping to the first burning question, how will the documentation standards be utilized by CAD users and aid them in consistency?
So, today, AutoCAD is still the main database of record. And, AutoCAD has a wide range of disciplines. So, what we want to kind of focus on is, having the drawings to set up generally for real estate facilities use, and then, of course, for use for a particular CAFM system. So there are settings within AutoCAD standards you want to establish to have, consistency. And some of those would be, kind of one of the big ones would be units of measure and the scale of a drawing. So in cases where you have a global portfolio, you're looking at, two measurement standards, generally imperial and metric. And then, depending on what, IWMS platform you're using, it actually may or may not support, multiple units of measure. So you want to address that and have those standardized, depending if it does use to. And if you're forced to go to one, how do you handle that as a CAD user? And one example might be, generally when the system only handles one, it usually take the metric and you scale it to imperial, because the metric and imperial drawings are scaled substantially different, about 25 times difference, and the square footage reporting would never be the same. Some other things we would focus on is drawing insertion point. You want that to be standard across the board where you pick that point, and that can affect things like XREFs, stacking multiple floors, and then maybe even extend over into the publishing, into the CAFM system. Then another big one would be blocks. The blocks in some cases can be, quite a bit more complex than a CAFM system can digest. And we need standards in place. How are you going to handle the complexity that you find in blocks? And this could be nested blocks, blocks within blocks, multiple layers within blocks, and then sometimes the blocks are in 3D. So a lot of the systems we use, we're used to working with multiple ones. Some of them just cannot digest the complexity of AutoCAD. We put it in our standards for this system, this client. Here are the steps you take. And this usually involves the publishing, right? It goes from AutoCAD and pushed in somehow where you can view the floor plates. So that's just a few examples of what the CAD documentation will do.
That's a fantastic point, Mike. You're touching base about units and scale. And, in my mind, or some people on the line will say, hey, units of scale and measurement, that's very general, right? But if you have an international presence, domestic and international, and you have teams that are international who are running CAD operations, it's critical for them to understand the complexity, like you said, Mike, right? Like, I've seen a very large tech firm who was international do a whole return to office concept, and their team internationally didn't have a CAD standards book. They didn't understand that, hey, we don't need to rescale our drawings, because if you are using Trirega, for example, it takes on multiple units, right? You can say, I can use my Impec, I can use metric, whatever that may be. It'll automatically convert it. But because this team wasn't educated in that concept, they took something around 3 million square feet, rescaled it, and then when they ingested it into Trirega, a floor plan that should have been something around 30,000 square feet was then magnified to 100,000 square feet per floor. So imagine that rolling up all the way to the building level, and then leadership getting that report at the end of the month saying, what the hell happened to our portfolio? Why is it all of a sudden 500,000 square feet when it should be like 100,000 total, right? So very, very strong point to talk about here. So Mike, what are some of the best practices for layer management and the benefits?
So, here we would first base our standards on the AIA and national CAD standards, and then distill it down to a manageable list. So, kind of the first rule is you try to keep them sort of simple, and it's good. We'll show you later how it kind of helps with managing the floor plans once they're published into a particular system. But we normally like to keep the master set in an Excel document, and then you can have your typical set of layers, the ones you ideally go with, and then maybe the deeper set of layers that might be needed for other conditions, like possibly if you do need to include something like mechanical or HVAC, or possibly some site information, that you still have a deeper set of layers, and the CAD users have a quick reference to retrieve that. And here's another way how we implement layer standards. And here we're going to do it in a digital format. So in this case, we're going to have our layer list that's in a digital form, and we can bring all those layers, just kind of slide them right into an AutoCAD drawing. You can also use this to make, use this particular tool for layer translation to make non-compliant layers to the compliant layers. So it will serve that function. And you can use this tool for basically quality control. You can look to see, are there any layers that are out of compliance?
That's a fantastic tool, especially if you're validating layers that were created by your architects, right? And comparing it to the layers that you have internally.
And we know it always varies. Every floor, it always is something different. In here, we just want to show where a lot of times nowadays, the layers aren't just kept to the CAD users. It can extend out to the end users. So here's an example of Tririga with a published floor plan. And Tririga and some others have the ability for layer visibility control. So again, it's where, especially now you're talking to end users, maybe planners, someone on the owner side, could be maintenance. And that's where now they're exposed to the layers. And that's where, another example of why you want to have consistency across all the floor plans to make it easier for them to understand and use.
So one thing I want to point out too is that most clients that we work with work to really strip the drawing down and bring as least amount of layers as possible, right? They kind of strip down to doors, walls, windows, furniture, fixed furniture, and stuff like that. But those are a certain amount of end users. Now, what happens when you have facility managers or your technicians who also want to interact with the tools? For them, what might be important is more looking at MEP drawings, right? So facility managers, even you, Mike, are familiar with this, is that these drawing sets have a ton amount of layers, right? And just to be able to view like an HVAC, for example, you might have to go up and down a list and toggle on 30, 40 different layers just to be able to see that full track system, right? So this is where CAD standards really come into play and drive efficiency. You'd probably want to take that entire HVAC unit, convert it maybe to something like A-HVAC, so that your technician can just come in here, click one button, and be able to see everything. Now, something else to point out too, which is important when it comes to standardization, is you don't want to be bringing in hundreds of different layers into your system. Not only does it affect performance, but it just bogs down the rendering, and it just makes your team entirely inefficient. So I think we've mentioned a couple of times Tririga as a platform. I do want to point out that we do support all platforms. I wanted to open up a poll to see what platform you're using today. So we should have a poll be kicked off right now, and I'll give that a few seconds to capture that. I'm curious what everyone is working on. Any IWMS systems that you're in? Maybe something other. If you're putting in other in the chat room, would you mind just putting in what that is? Right. Okay. Awesome. Thank you guys for submitting that. Mike, I'll push this next one to you.
So, yet again on the same topic as far as the CAD layers basically being extended or exposed over to the end user. So this is an example where from AutoCAD, we can create a PDF of a floor plan, which everyone's accustomed to. What you may not know is you can actually put the layers into a drawing, and the end user will actually have layer visibility control within the PDFs. So, and this is essentially free. I mean, the example that we're using is the free version of Adobe Acrobat Reader, and there's quite a few other, like if you use Bluebeam or some of the other PDF tools, they normally support this as well. It's a different place where you find the layer visibility control.
Again, I want to highlight something that Mike just said, free Adobe Reader. So you don't need to be spending money on a AutoCAD license. You don't need to be having a subscription cost to whatever IWMS system it is. So if leadership does need to interact with your graphics, again, you can use a PDF with layer control in it so that they can take a look and get the data elements that they need. So running to our next topic is talking about BOMA standards. This is something I've been geeking on since, the 90s, and we've seen so many different versions come out, right, Mike? But the one thing that I've seen that is consistent across the board is every single organization has their own translation of what BOMA is, right? And if you ask them, hey, do you have a copy of the BOMA book? Typically, no one does. So they come up with their own concepts of what it's all about. So Mike, what are some of the best methods for polylining and their benefits?
So, in this case, what we like to do is create our own custom polyline standard guide. And it's designed specifically really for the CAD user to kind of make it simple and easy to understand. And what we try to cover is about 90% of the conditions that you run into. We feel like this document will pretty much cover. And if you will, it's sort of like taking, if you ever look at the BOMA, the documentation, it's quite a few pages. It's kind of a thick document. And then, if we go beyond BOMA, you might have something from IFMA. There's like a BOMA IFMA combined, and there's some other smaller ones out there. But we want to compress this down to something that's easy to understand. And of course, it will focus on things like how do you handle vertical penetrations? How do you handle service areas, secondary, primary circulation, and occupiable space? And then what do you do when those areas are adjacent to each other? So what our focus is on CAD is the end result of this will be your square footage numbers, the accuracy of the numbers. They're obviously derived from CAD. They're derived from the polylines. So that's why we try to make it as simple as possible for all the CAD users to understand, bring consistency to our portfolio.
And Mike, correct me if I'm not mistaken, this is something we use internally too for our own team, right? So let's say we have new people who don't know what BOMA is. This is something you provide to our own team members to get them educated pretty quickly?
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
And to continue on with that, we have like a little bit of just try to make the interior gross polyline a little easier to understand. So that's generally a requirement that you're always going to have. This is where your square footage starts from, basically, and everything gets filled in from there. So, you want to get this one right. And where you typically have some problems is understanding the glazing partitions on the exterior, and then how the 50% dominant rule comes into play. So we like to cover that here, and it works well.
Mike, to add on to this, you might remember this project, but we did an audit again for a international tech company. Again, returned to office, and they asked us, hey, can you please take a look at all of our drawings, make sure, number one, we're following BOMA compliance and all of our P lines are correct, following layer standardization. And they came back to us and said, hey, we are damn near 100% certain that it's going to be perfect, and you guys are barely going to need to do anything. Lo and behold, after the audit, 90% of their drawings, and again, this is going over 13 million square feet, needed to be redone. They weren't following BOMA. The internal gross polylines were a complete disaster. So again, a lot of people do think that they're following it by the book, when in fact, they're all over the place. Again, their standards, there was no consistency in their BOMA polylining. So having something like this in your standards book is imperative for your success.
And then, yet another look at this is keeping in mind the consideration for when you have floors that are stacked, and when the vertical construction is the same, which you have in some buildings, you kind of want the CAD user to focus on things like the vertical penetrations and service areas that in some cases are the exact same floor to floor to floor. And you don't want to kind of be focused on one floor and not the other, where square footages might vary a little bit. And normally where this goes noticed would be, within the CAFM platform and the reporting, you'd see a variance in the square footages. So you'd want something like, ideally, an elevator shaft to be the same all the way through, assuming the construction really is the same. So that's what this document's about.
Right. And something to point out again, Mike, is we mentioned that it is part of the standard book to have all your drawings at the 000 coordinates. Some people totally fly over that concept, but this is why. So when you are doing an audit on your building and you're stacking all your drawings through XREFs, you're inserting it at a 000 point. So this way you can quickly see, is there any discrepancies in my floor, right? You might have some floors that are perfect. And like Mike said, the vertical penetration in elevator should be up and down. There shouldn't be going left to right in any certain way, shape, or form, right? This is an elevator. So you'll be able to quickly see that when you do your XREFs in there. And you can also see, hey, well, maybe there's just an error in how the polyline was drawn, because in most cases, sometimes people also include the cosmetic build out of the elevator as part of the square footage. So I just wanted to point that out real quick. Mike, moving on to the next hot burning topic, what are some of the best methods to achieve space numbering standards and consistency?
So, this one can be a little tricky sometimes, but, I would say two major methods exist. So it could be where the space numbering standards are derived from the physical space, right? I mean, that's one way. An owner might want those to actually match. I happen to like those particular cases. And, another way is, if not that, they're going to be derived from the CAD or CAFM system. And in some cases, it's going to end up being a combination of the two. So obviously where this aids us is, onboarding a new floor and then renumbering of existing. So you want to have your space numbering logic like documented, and that covers quite a few things. So, where would the numbering start on the floor? What's the orientation? What type of nomenclature would you consider? Meaning like, is there going to be a difference from the occupiable spaces to the non-occupiable, like vertical penetration and service areas? And then, when it comes down to your more condensed spaces like workstations, those usually have even yet a different, style of numbering. So your documentation is going to help, especially if they're going to rely on the CAD users to generate it. And this area is a little bit all over the place. Sometimes it's completely provided by the owner. Sometimes they want, the CAD group to create it based on a set of standards. So always generally have, especially if the CAD group's going to be creating the space number standards, it's nice to have standards in place.
Yes, this is great, Mike. Something else that I want to point out too is that this is focusing on a CAD playbook standards, but it's so much more than that. It also encompasses change management. Now, we're talking about numbering, but think about the return to office concept. Everyone's top question is, how much space do we need? Do we need space? Are we getting rid of space? Are we revamping space? Your space floor plans are not going to be static. They're going to be very dynamic, especially with how we're envisioning the return to office. What is your space going to look like? You're going to be getting rid of cubicles. You're going to redo everything. And most likely, you're going to be working with design and construction, either outsourced or internally. You're going to be working with architects. And one thing to point out is when you give projects to architects, they only change certain areas of your floor plan, right? They don't care about the rest of it. And sometimes what also happens is they use their own standards to rename the space. They don't care about the other buildings or the 30 floors that you may have. They're going to apply their own standards. And that's going to be a headache for you. Like, okay, well, what was your logic? Now we have to reapply our logic. So forget all of that. If you have this standards book already in play, you say, hey, design construction team, architects who are outsourced, you must follow our procedures. Otherwise, we don't work with you, period, right? You say, this is what we follow. This is our standards, follow our standards. And when they submit everything back to you, it meets your requirements and not the other way around. So I think this is definitely something that not many organizations really put too much emphasis on it. And they really do. They really need to think about it because it's way more than just, hey, we got to think about how we're going to renumber our space. It's change management in a nutshell.
I think I can honestly say it's my least favorite to deal with too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's difficult, and a lot of people just don't understand the strategy behind it, because there is one, and kind of even going in a nutshell, talking about the standards, people just think, hey, I can number my space 1 through 100 and not apply any logic saying, hey, let's put an STR in front of it for stairwell. So when it comes down to going into your database, let's say Archibus, Tririga, whatever you want to call it, how do you filter your space? How do you look for your space? How do you quickly identify what it is? And how do people understand what the space is? With having some nomenclature in front of it, you can at least say, hey, okay, I understand what the space is, right? So anyway, moving forward. Mike, I know you as being a guru in Lisp teams. So what are some of the advantages or advanced methods in AutoCAD that can be used to help ensure standards and bring efficiency to apply them?
So, here we will use the Lisp routines. Basically, it's going to be like a CAD workflow enhancement tool, and basically a quality control type of tool too, usually. So, some examples would be for polylining. We want to, seek out crossed, overlapped, gap polylines, and this would of course help out with the square footage accuracy. Again, knowing that all of the square footages that you ever find in a IWMS platform, it's derived from CAD, it's derived from the polylines, and and basically this is a tool that is a self QC and can be used as a peer QC type of tool. So that's one way like a Lisp routine can be very handy. And like another example would be going back to that topic where you might have some 3D blocks that the CAFM system just doesn't digest. Some of those are like really stubborn, and native AutoCAD doesn't really compress those very well. So you sometimes resorting to like a Lisp routine that can focus on that type of 3D block to help flatten it and make it more elementary and usable for the particular CAFM system. And then yet another one would be like an example of a client that we have that uses Tririga, and they have like a third-party platform that views the floor plans. And when we would do the native publish to Tririga, those particular floor plans didn't look right in the third-party system. Basically, how we wanted the colors and layer functionality to work. So we found we have to do another set of publishing for that particular tool. So in this case, what we do is kind of like, reduce our steps and help us bring consistency when we publish, because there's a lot of little things to remember. So, we had the ability to stick this into a Lisp routine and perform that function. So you basically just, the end user just executes a command that performs all these tasks in the background and basically pushes one out for native Tririga on the published and pushes one out for the other system simultaneously. So that's just a few examples of how a Lisp routine can automate your workflow.
That's awesome, Mike. And this is something, again, that we have a full library of Lisp routines. So this is something that you feel can help make your team more efficient, or something that you need as a QC process. This is something that we can obviously offer to you as well. So Mike, I want to thank you for joining us and providing all of your wisdom in the topic. To recap, what did we discuss today? Well, why CAD standard consistency is critical in your CAFM IWMS portfolio. Standards bring efficiency to the CAD process and workflow. We introduced the content to consider when building your CAD standards playbook. Again, this is something that you can either lean on Impec to help you with, or again, we're going to provide this deck and give you the main elements that you should consider when building your playbook. And lastly, we talked about the advanced AutoCAD tools to augment your process, which were the Lisp routines. Again, if you have something in mind that you wanted to automate, that's something we can either build for you and deliver that as well. So I want to open up to Q&A, and thank you, everyone. So if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat room, and we'll go ahead and answer those for you. Mike, this question is for you. How many layers should be maintained to help effectively support FM operations?
Well, how many? So, you know, part of that I would say would depend. Like, really, some of the you know, IWMS platforms will be more sensitive than others on the layers. So the answer kind of depends maybe what platform you're using, but you know, really to maintain a set of the real estate drawings at the facility level for these systems, you want to kind of keep it down to a certain amount. So if I also throw out a number, maybe 30 or less.
But we're going to close up. I want to thank everyone for attending today. We're going to release this recording and the deck at the very end. And again, thank you. And hopefully you'll join us in our next series.
Thank you.